It still feels strange to admit this, but the call didn't make me happy right away. It confused me first, the kind of confusion that makes you laugh softly and then stop, like, ha, why now of all times? Because for one whole year there had been nothing, not a call, not a message, not even a dry "I'm busy" text. Just silence so thick it pressed on my chest every morning when I woke up and every night when I went to sleep. And I had replayed that silence so many times in my head that it had become my fault somehow. Say, maybe I talked too much, maybe I asked too many questions, maybe I reminded him too often that I was getting older. Maybe I embarrassed him without realizing it, and I know how pathetic that sounds, but when you're a mother and your child disappears from your life, your mind doesn't look for the truth, it looks for blame, and it almost always lands on you. I had called him on birthdays and hung up before voicemail picked up because my voice sounded too desperate. I had written messages and deleted them because they felt too needy. I had even laughed at myself once in the kitchen and said out loud, ha 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 ha, look at you, rehearsing a conversation that will never happen, and that laugh had turned into something sharp in my throat because the house answered back with silence. And then one random afternoon, when I was folding laundry and thinking about nothing important at all, my phone rang and I almost didn't answer because unknown numbers had started to feel like small disappointments. But I did answer. And I heard his voice, my son's voice, calm and flat like he was calling to confirm a dentist appointment, and he said my name without warmth, without anger either, just neutral, and for a second my brain couldn't catch up to my heart. Because my heart had already jumped ahead and thought this is it, this is the moment, this is where he says he's sorry, this is where he explains everything, but instead he said he was inviting me to Christmas dinner, Saturday evening, his house. 6 o'clock, and there was no "how are you," no "I missed you," no "are you okay," just the invitation hanging there like a test, and I remember gripping the edge of the table because my legs felt weak, and I said yes too quickly. Embarrassingly quickly, like I was afraid the invitation might vanish if I hesitated. And after the call ended, I stood there staring at my phone with this ridiculous smile on my face, half crying, half laughing, whispering to myself, See, I knew it, I knew he'd come around, and I started making excuses for him immediately because that's what mothers do. I told myself he must have been busy, stressed, overwhelmed, maybe marriage changes people. Maybe he didn't know how to talk to me anymore, maybe he thought I was strong enough to handle the distance. And that's when the guilt crept in again, slow and heavy, because maybe I had been too strong, too independent. Maybe I taught him not to need me and then got hurt when he didn't, and that night I couldn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because my mind was buzzing with memories of him as a little boy, running into the house with scraped knees, crying and laughing at the same time, calling my name like it was the safest word in the world, and I kept thinking how strange it was that the same child could grow into someone who could go a whole year without speaking to me. And yet here he was, inviting me back into his life like nothing had happened, and the hope was dangerous, I know that now, but hope always is when it arrives after a long drought, it makes you ignore the cracks in the ground. And over the next few days I cleaned my apartment like someone important was coming to visit, even though he wasn't, I was the one going to him. I picked out a gift and wrapped it carefully, adjusting the ribbon again and again until it looked perfect, because a small part of me still wanted his approval, still wanted him to look at something I'd done and say, "You did good, Mom." And I practiced what I might say if he asked about the silence. I promised myself I wouldn't cry, ha ha ha, which is always a lie we tell ourselves, and every time a tiny voice in my head whispered, "Isn't it strange he didn't explain anything? Isn't it strange he sounded so cold?" I pushed it away with, "Don't ruin this, don't ruin your chance," because when you've been lonely for long enough, you start seeing any door opening as a miracle, not a question. And the morning of the dinner I woke up early with that nervous energy that makes your hands shake a little when you pour coffee, my stomach already tight, my heart already racing ahead of reality, and as I got dressed I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused, because I looked older than I felt, lines around my eyes, silver in my hair. And for a moment I wondered if that was part of the reason he'd pulled away, if I reminded him too much of time passing, of responsibility, of things he didn't want to think about, and I sighed and told myself to stop. To just be grateful, to just show up, because showing up is what I'd always done for him, again and again, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt, and as I locked the door behind me and held the gift close to my chest. I had no idea that this invitation wasn't a bridge back to my son at all, but something else entirely, something that would make me question not just that year of silence, but every quiet moment before it. And if you think this was just a story about a lonely mother finally getting a Christmas dinner invitation, you should know this was only the beginning, because the silence wasn't the scariest part, the reason behind it was. The drive itself felt longer than it should have, even though I'd taken that road dozens of times before, and the whole way there my mind kept bouncing between excitement and unease like it couldn't decide which one it wanted to believe. And I remember laughing under my breath at one point, Imagine being this nervous just to have dinner with your own child. But my hands were tight on the steering wheel and my shoulders ached from holding myself so stiff. Because hope has a way of making you careful, like if you move the wrong way it might disappear, and every red light felt personal, like the universe was testing how badly I wanted this. And while the radio played soft Christmas music that normally would have made me smile, it just made the silence in the car feel heavier, because I kept thinking about the last time I'd driven this route. The last Christmas I'd spent at his house and how normal it all seemed back then, how I'd walked in carrying food I'd made with love and left feeling like a guest instead of a mother. I should have paid attention to that feeling, but I didn't. Because I wanted so badly to believe things were different now, that the invitation meant something had shifted inside him, that maybe he'd finally missed me the way I missed him every single day. And as I drove, memories kept popping up without asking permission, like him as a teenager slumped in the passenger seat complaining about school, like him calling me from college saying he was tired and just needed to hear my voice. And those memories felt so close and so far at the same time that my chest hurt, and I wondered when exactly that version of us had disappeared, when our conversations had turned polite and short, and when they'd stopped altogether. And I caught myself rehearsing smiles at stop signs, literally practicing how I'd greet him, how I wouldn't sound desperate, how I'd act casual like a mother who wasn't starved for connection, ha. As if you can fake that kind of hunger, and at one point I glanced at the wrapped gift on the passenger seat and adjusted it, smoothing the ribbon again even though it was already perfect. Because doing something small with my hands kept my thoughts from spiraling too far, and I told myself that gifts are bridges, that gestures matter, that surely he'd see the effort and understand that everything I'd ever done came from love. And then a quiet thought slipped in, unwelcome but persistent: why invite me now, right before Christmas after a year of nothing? And I felt my stomach twist because I didn't have a good answer. Just excuses I'd made up to protect myself, and the closer I got, the bigger his neighborhood became. The houses stretching wider, the gates taller, the kind of place where everything looks clean and expensive and controlled. And I couldn't help but feel small pulling my old car into that space, like I didn't quite belong there anymore, and that feeling brought back a familiar ache. The one where you realize your child has outgrown you in ways that don't feel natural, ways that leave you behind instead of carrying you along, and I tried to shake it off, whispering to myself, it's just nerves, it's just the holidays. Don't read into everything, but my body didn't listen, my heart beat faster, my mouth felt dry, and I remember sighing out loud and saying, it's fine, like that might make it true, and as I turned onto his street. The decorations grew brighter, lights lining trees and roofs, everything glowing and festive, and I thought how beautiful it all looked, how warm and inviting it should have felt, and yet there was a strange heaviness pressing down on me. Like I was walking towards something important without knowing whether it would save me or break me, and when his house finally came into view, bigger than I remembered, lights shining through the windows, I felt that sharp mix of pride and distance all at once, pride that my son had built this life, and distance because I wasn't sure where I fit in it anymore. And as I slowed the car and took a deep breath, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it, I had no idea that the hardest part of this night wasn't going to be what my son would say to me, but what someone else would do the moment I stepped out of that car. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed wasn't the house itself but how quiet everything felt, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful but watchful, like the air is holding its breath. And I sat there for a second longer than I needed to, engine still running, staring at the place and trying to convince myself that this was real, that I hadn't imagined the invitation, that I wasn't about to embarrass myself by knocking on a door where I wasn't truly welcome. And when I stepped out of the car, the cold hit my face sharply and I hugged my coat tighter around me, clutching the wrapped gift like it was proof that I belonged here. And as I walked closer, I really saw the house, not just big but carefully perfect, tall windows glowing warmly, decorations arranged with taste and money. Everything polished in a way that made my own life feel rough around the edges, and I remember thinking, oh, he's really made it, and that thought carried pride and sadness together. Because success had built walls between us that I didn't know how to climb, and as I reached the front steps my heart started racing again, faster this time, and I actually laughed nervously to myself, calm down, it's just dinner. But my hand shook when I lifted it to knock, and before my knuckles even touched the door, it opened, not to my son, not to a familiar face, but to a woman I'd never seen before, dressed simply. Eyes wide in a way that immediately made my stomach drop, and for a split second we just stared at each other, her gaze flicking from my face to the gift in my hands and back again. And something in her expression wasn't neutral or polite, it was alarmed, like she was seeing something she wasn't supposed to see, and before I could even introduce myself or say why I was there, she stepped closer, too close. And I smelled cleaning products on her clothes and felt the rush of warm air from inside the house. and then her hand reached out and grabbed my arm, not gently, not aggressively either, but urgently. Like someone grabbing you before you step into traffic, and I froze, my brain lagging behind the moment, and I whispered, confused, "I'm here to see my son," because that was the only truth I could hold on to. And she didn't answer right away, she just tightened her grip slightly, her fingers trembling against my sleeve, and leaned in so close I could feel her breath, and her eyes filled with something that looked like fear mixed with guilt. And she glanced over her shoulder toward the inside of the house, toward the warm lights and music and everything that looked so normal from the outside, and that's when a deep chill slid down my spine. Because fear doesn't live in houses like this for no reason, and before I could ask another question, before I could pull my arm away or even think clearly, she whispered something so soft and so desperate that it didn't sound like a warning at first, it sounded like a plea, and in that moment, standing on my son's doorstep with a stranger gripping my arm and terror in her eyes, I realized this dinner was not what I thought it was at all, and whatever was waiting for me inside that house was something she was trying desperately to save me from. Her voice was barely louder than the wind, but the words hit me harder than any shout ever could, because when she whispered them, they weren't dramatic or angry, they were shaken, almost breaking apart as they left her mouth. And for a second my brain refused to understand them, like, surely I heard that wrong, people don't say things like this without a reason. But she did, she leaned in closer and whispered, "Don't go in, please, just leave right now." And my first reaction wasn't fear, it was confusion, deep and heavy, because nothing in front of me matched those words. The house looked warm, decorated, alive with soft music and laughter somewhere deeper inside. And I actually pulled my arm slightly, instinctively wanting to step past her and say something polite like, "Excuse me, because I'm a mother coming for Christmas dinner, not someone who needs rescuing," and I whispered back, "What are you talking about? I'm his mother," like that alone should explain everything, like being his mother should automatically make me safe. And the way her face changed when I said that is something I'll never forget, because whatever fear she was holding doubled instantly. Her eyes shining with tears she was trying not to let fall, and she shook her head just once, small and sharp, and tightened her grip again, and in that moment I felt something cold settle in my chest. Because people don't beg strangers like this unless they're terrified, and she glanced behind her again, faster this time, like she was afraid someone might see us, and whispered, "I could lose my job, I could lose everything, but I can't let you walk in there," and my mouth went dry, because now this wasn't confusion anymore, this was danger, real danger. The kind that makes your body react before your mind does, and I remember my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was in my throat, my ears ringing slightly, and I asked the only question that made sense to me. The question a mother asks before anything else, "Is my son okay?" And she hesitated just for a second too long, and that hesitation hurt more than any answer, because it told me there was something she couldn't say out loud. Something heavy and dark sitting right behind that door, and she swallowed hard and said, "He's fine," but the way she said it didn't feel true, it felt careful, and then she leaned in even closer and said, "You're not safe here." And I felt my knees go weak. Not safe, those words don't belong in a sentence with family and Christmas and home, and my brain started racing, trying to connect dots that didn't want to connect, and I shook my head slightly, whispering, "I don't understand," because I truly didn't, and she squeezed my arm once like a final push and said, "Please, get in your car, drive away, don't come back," and for a moment I just stood there frozen. The gift heavy in my hands, my fingers numb, staring at this woman who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by warning me, and that's when something shifted inside me, something quiet but strong. Because even though I didn't understand what she was protecting me from, I understood one thing clearly: fear like hers doesn't lie. And as I stood on that doorstep with lights glowing behind her and cold air biting at my face, I realized I was standing between two choices, one that followed blood and habit and one that followed instinct and survival, and whatever I chose next was going to change everything. I don't remember making the decision so much as I remember my body moving before my mind could argue with it, because one moment I was standing there frozen with questions piling up in my head, and the next I was stepping backward, gently pulling my arm out of her grip, and the look on her face when she realized I was leaving almost made me stop, because relief washed over her so fast it scared me, like she'd been holding her breath and finally let it go. And she whispered "thank you" under her breath, not to me exactly, but to the choice itself, and then she turned quickly and disappeared back inside the house, moving faster than someone who was just doing their job. And that was the moment fear really hit me, full and heavy, because whatever was happening inside that house was big enough to make someone risk everything just to warn me, and my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands shaking as I walked back down the steps, and I remember laughing once, short and shaky, "This is ridiculous, you're overreacting," but my legs didn't slow down, they moved faster, almost running. And the cold air burned my lungs as I reached my car, fumbling with the keys like they'd suddenly forgotten how to work, and when I finally got the door open and dropped into the seat, I locked it immediately without thinking. The sound of the lock clicking into place feeling like the only solid thing in the world, and I sat there for a second gripping the steering wheel, my chest tight, trying to breathe in and out, in and out. Like I used to tell scared patients at the hospital, except this time it wasn't working, and my eyes darted to the house, half expecting the door to fly open, half expecting someone to come after me, but nothing happened. The lights stayed warm, the music kept playing, everything looked normal, and that somehow made it worse, because danger that hides behind normal smiles is the kind that doesn't give warnings. And I put the car in reverse and pulled out too fast, tires crunching loudly on the gravel, my hands trembling so badly I had to tighten my grip just to keep control, and as I drove down the long driveway, my mind finally caught up and panic rushed in all at once, questions slamming into me from every direction. What just happened? Why did she stop me? What does she know? What kind of mother leaves her own child's house without even knocking? And I felt tears spill over, hot and sudden, blurring my vision, because along with fear there was heartbreak, sharp and deep. The kind that feels like something tearing inside you, and I glanced at the passenger seat where the wrapped gift lay untouched, perfect ribbon, perfect paper, looking so foolish now that it almost hurt to look at it, and I whispered, "I just wanted dinner," like saying it out loud might make it make sense, and I reached the end of the driveway and turned onto the road, my heart still racing, my body buzzing with adrenaline. And I told myself I'd pull over in a minute, just a minute to calm down, to think, to maybe call him and ask what was going on. But before I could decide anything, before I could even catch my breath properly, my phone buzzed loudly in the silence of the car, and the sound made me jump so hard I gasped. Because deep down I already knew this wasn't going to be a normal call, and whatever I was about to hear was going to explain exactly why that woman begged me to run. The sound of my phone buzzing felt unnaturally loud in the quiet car, like it had cut straight through my thoughts, and for a second I just stared at it, my hands hovering in the air as if touching it might make whatever was coming next real. And I remember whispering, "Please, please don't be him," because I wasn't ready to hear my son's voice, not yet, not after the fear in that woman's eyes, not after the way my body had run without asking permission. And when I finally picked it up, my fingers were trembling so badly I almost dropped it, and the screen showed an unknown number, which somehow made my stomach sink even more, because unknown numbers rarely bring comfort, and when I answered, my voice came out small and unsteady, and the man on the other end didn't waste time with pleasantries. He said my name clearly, carefully, like he needed to make sure he had the right person, and then he introduced himself, his tone calm. Professional, the kind of voice that carries weight even before the words do, and he asked me where I was, exactly where I was, and something about the way he asked made my chest tighten, because this wasn't a casual question. This was a safety question, and I told him I'd just left my son's house, that I was pulled over not far away, and there was a pause, just a brief one, but it felt heavy, like the air dropping before a storm. And then he said something I wasn't prepared for, something that made my heart skip painfully. He told me not to go back under any circumstances, not to turn around, not to answer the door if anyone followed me. And I laughed weakly without meaning to. "Ha," I said, "what is this, some kind of mistake?" Because my mind was still desperately trying to stay in the world where this was just a misunderstanding, and he didn't laugh back, not even a little. And instead he asked me a question that made my throat go dry. He asked if I had gone inside the house, and when I said no, that I'd left because someone warned me, his voice changed, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. And he said quietly, "That warning saved your life," and for a moment everything inside me went still, like my brain had shut down to protect itself, and I remember gripping the phone tighter, my knuckles whitening, and whispering, "What?" because that was the only word I had left, and he explained slowly, carefully, like he was handling something fragile, that they had been watching my son, that there was a plan, that tonight was important, that if I had stayed, if I had walked inside and sat down at that table, something would have happened to me, something that would have looked natural, something no one would question. And as he spoke, my vision started to blur, not from tears yet, but from shock. The kind that makes everything feel distant and unreal, and my body felt heavy and light at the same time, my heart pounding while my hands went numb, and I interrupted him without meaning to, my voice breaking. "This doesn't make sense, he's my son," because that sentence had always been enough before, enough to explain everything, enough to guarantee safety, and there was another pause, longer this time, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, steadier. And he said something that split my world cleanly in two. He said my son had invited me for a reason, and it wasn't reconciliation. And as the words sank in, a sound escaped my throat that didn't feel human. A soft, broken noise somewhere between a sob and a breath, because in that moment every excuse I had made over the past year collapsed at once, and I felt something deep inside me crack. Because this wasn't about distance or stress or misunderstandings anymore, This was about intent, and I realized with a sinking certainty that the silence, the sudden invitation, the fear in that woman's eyes, none of it was random. It was all connected, and as I sat there shaking in my car, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the truth unravel piece by piece, I understood something terrifying and irreversible. The person I had been driving to see that night wasn't the child I raised, and whatever he had planned for me was something I might never fully recover from. I remember sliding the phone down to my lap for a moment because my hands were shaking too much to keep it at my ear, my chest rising and falling in short, uneven breaths. Sigh like my body was trying to reject the words it had just heard, and I stared straight ahead through the windshield without really seeing anything, because my mind was racing backward through the last year, replaying every ignored call, every unanswered message, every night I'd sat on my couch wondering what I'd done wrong, and suddenly all of it began lining up in a way that made my stomach twist painfully, because this wasn't distance, this wasn't stress. This wasn't a son needing space, this was preparation, and when the man on the phone continued, explaining that they'd been watching my son for weeks, that the invitation wasn't spontaneous but planned, my breath caught in my throat, all planned. That word felt so cold, so deliberate, and I asked him why. Why would he do this? Because that was the only question that mattered now, and there was another pause before he answered. The kind of pause that tells you you're not going to like what comes next, and when he spoke again, he told me it was about money, and I actually laughed at first, a hollow, disbelieving laugh, ha 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 ha, money, because I didn't have any. Not really, just a small pension, a simple life, nothing worth destroying a family over, and I told him there must be some mistake, that I had nothing anyone would want, and that's when he said my husband's name. My late husband, and my heart lurched because that was a door I hadn't opened in decades, and he explained slowly that there was an old insurance policy, one I never knew about, one that had resurfaced recently, and that it was worth more than I could even wrap my head around. And as he said the number, my ears rang because it didn't sound real, it sounded like something meant for other people, not someone like me. And he told me that my son had known about it for over a year, that he'd found out before I did, and suddenly the silence made sense in the most horrifying way possible, because he hadn't cut me off because he didn't care. He'd cut me off because he was waiting for the right moment, waiting until everything was lined up perfectly, and my stomach rolled so violently I had to open the car door and lean out, retching onto the cold ground. My body reacting before my mind could catch up, tears streaming down my face as my whole world collapsed into one unbearable truth, that the child I carried, the child I sacrificed for, had looked at me and seen a payout. And when I finally managed to sit back up, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, my voice sounded far away even to me when I asked if this was certain, if there was proof. Because a part of me still wanted this to be a nightmare I could wake up from, and he told me there was evidence, messages, recordings, plans discussed in detail, and that the woman who warned me had come forward weeks earlier, risking everything to stop it, and I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel, because the weight of that courage crushed me, a stranger protecting me while my own son plotted my end, and as the truth settled in, slow and heavy, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened, because in that moment I understood that the year of silence wasn't abandonment at all, it was calculation, and the invitation to Christmas dinner wasn't forgiveness. It was timing, and as I sat there shaking, listening to the man on the phone tell me I was safe now, that they had him, that nothing was going to happen to me tonight, I realized with a clarity that hurt worse than fear ever could, if I had walked through that door, I wouldn't have walked out again. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time without starting the car again, just staring at my reflection in the dark windshield, because suddenly every memory I had was changing shape. Like someone had taken my past and turned it slightly so the shadows fell differently, and I found myself whispering, "How did I not see it?" Over and over, sigh, because once your mind knows the truth, it starts pulling old moments back into the light whether you want it to or not, and I thought about the way he'd grown distant slowly, not all at once, how conversations became shorter, how warmth drained from his voice long before the silence fully arrived, and how I'd blamed myself every step of the way, telling myself I was too needy, too old, too much, when really he had already stepped away emotionally. Already decided I was something to manage, not someone to love, and that realization hurt in a deep, embarrassing way, because it meant all those nights I cried alone were built on a lie I told myself to survive, and I let out a small, broken laugh. Imagine apologizing to someone who was planning your funeral, and the more I thought about it, the more signs I remembered, little comments that felt harmless at the time, questions about paperwork, casual mentions of finances, jokes that landed strangely but that I brushed off because I didn't want to believe anything bad about my own child. And my chest tightened when I realized how often we protect the people who hurt us by refusing to connect the dots, and then my thoughts drifted back to her, the woman at the door, the way her hand shook when she grabbed my arm. The way she looked at me not like a stranger but like someone she recognized, and I understood then that she hadn't just been afraid for me, she had been fighting something inside herself too, fear against conscience. Survival against doing what was right, and she chose me, chose a stranger over her own safety, and that choice felt heavier than everything else combined, because it showed me something I wasn't ready to face yet. That love doesn't always come from where you expect it, and sometimes the people who share your blood are not the ones who will protect you when it matters most, and I felt tears spill again, slow and quiet this time, not the panicked kind. But the grieving kind, the kind that comes when you finally accept that something is truly gone, and as I wiped my face and sat back in the seat, I realized I wasn't just mourning the betrayal. I was mourning the version of my son that had existed only in my memory, the one I'd kept alive by refusing to question him, and that grief settled into me like a weight, heavy but steady. And I knew then that whatever came next wouldn't just be about what he'd planned to do to me, it would be about what I was going to do with the truth now that I finally had it, because the night wasn't over yet. And there was still one more thing I was about to learn that would change how I saw everything. I didn't even realize I was crying again until my chest started aching, that dull pressure that comes when emotions sit too long without a place to go, and as I wiped my face and finally turned the key in the ignition. My hand steadier now in a strange, exhausted way, I felt like I had crossed an invisible line because whatever I was before tonight, I wasn't that person anymore. And when I pulled back onto the road and followed the instructions I'd been given, my mind kept drifting between disbelief and a sharp, growing clarity, like fog lifting whether I wanted it to or not. And when I saw the flashing lights in the distance, red and blue cutting through the dark like something final, my heart skipped again, but this time not from fear, from recognition, because this was real, all of it was real. And as I slowed the car and pulled over where I was told, I noticed how calm the street looked, houses glowing softly with Christmas lights, families probably laughing inside. Unaware that just minutes ago I had almost become a quiet tragedy someone else would have explained away, and when an officer approached my window, his voice gentle, asking if I was okay, I surprised myself by nodding. Because somehow I was not whole, not healed, but alive, and that mattered more than anything else in that moment. And as I followed them from a distance, my thoughts kept circling back to one unbearable truth, that the people inside that house had been acting normal right up until the end, smiling, decorating, preparing a table for me, and the idea that cruelty can wear such ordinary faces made my stomach turn. Because it meant danger doesn't always look like danger, sometimes it looks like family, and when I finally parked and sat there again, waiting, my phone buzzed once more, and for a terrifying second I thought it might be him, but it wasn't. It was a short message from a number I didn't recognize, just a few words, apologetic, shaky, saying she was sorry and that she couldn't explain everything yet, but that she was glad I listened. And when I read it, something inside me cracked open again, because that woman had done more for me in one moment than my own child had done in a year, and I whispered thank you into the empty car even though she couldn't hear me. And as time passed and I was told pieces of what would happen next, about investigations and statements and consequences, I realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about facing something I had avoided my entire life, the idea that loving someone doesn't mean they are good, and that being a mother doesn't protect you from becoming a target, and as heavy as that truth was, it also brought an unexpected strength with it, because for the first time in a year I wasn't questioning my worth, I wasn't wondering what I had done wrong, I wasn't begging for understanding, I was standing in reality. Painful and sharp but solid, and as I sat there under the quiet sky, listening to distant sirens and holiday music drifting from nearby houses, I knew that whatever happened next would force me to face him not as my child, but as who he truly was, and that realization scared me almost as much as it steadied me, because the hardest part of this story wasn't behind me yet, it was waiting just ahead, where truth finally demands an answer. I wish I could say the fear vanished after that night, but it didn't. It just changed shape, settling deeper, quieter, like something you learn to carry instead of something that chases you, and in the days that followed, as I replayed everything again and again, one thought kept returning no matter how hard I tried to push it away, that I was alive not because I was loved, but because I was warned. And that truth hurt in a way I still don't have perfect words for, because it forced me to accept something every parent fears but rarely admits, that sometimes the people we give everything to do not grow into the people we imagine. And that love, real love, doesn't always flow back in the direction we expect, and I cried for the son I thought I had, not the man he turned out to be, sigh, because those are two very different losses, and over time, as the shock softened, something else quietly took its place, a strange, steady gratitude, not for the pain, not for the betrayal, but for the moment of choice that saved me, the moment I trusted my instinct instead of my longing. Because if I had walked through that door driven by hope alone, I wouldn't be here telling this story, and that realization changed the way I see everything now, every relationship, every silence, every sudden invitation that arrives without explanation, and I've learned to listen more closely to fear when it shows up calmly and without drama, because sometimes fear isn't there to hurt you, it's there to protect you. And I think about her often, the woman who grabbed my arm and whispered the truth when she didn't have to, and I think about how courage doesn't always look loud or heroic. Sometimes it looks like a quiet warning at the right moment. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. Never ignore the voice inside you just because it conflicts with what you want to believe. Never assume that blood guarantees safety. And never feel ashamed for choosing yourself when something feels wrong. All because survival is not betrayal, it's wisdom earned the hard way. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you pause, reflect, or see a familiar situation a little more clearly, then stay with this channel, subscribe for more real stories like this, stories about family, truth, and the moments that change everything, because sometimes the warning comes softly. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster is the courage to listen, and I'm grateful every single day that I did.